"You're vandalizing government land." That's what the HOA president shrieked at me as I stood on my own grass, watching a surveyor take measurements of the reservoir behind my home. The reservoir I had just inherited, the body of water everyone took for granted, was neighborhood common ground because some antiquated plat map from the 80s claimed it was. She'd already summoned the police on me 2 times, reported me for trespassing on my own soil, and warned the whole subdivision I was a risk to their water rights. But she had no clue what my uncle had stored away in that security box. Leave a comment below and let me know where you're tuning in from, because this tale is about to get intense. The carrying felt unnaturally weighty in my hand the first time I unlocked the front door. Uncle Roland had passed 3 months prior, but the cabin still carried his scent. Aged paper, redwood, and a faint metallic tang I couldn't identify. The attorney had passed me the deed folder a fortnight earlier with a gaze that hinted he was privy to information I was not. Now I saw why. The home was positioned at the terminus of a crushed stone driveway, secluded from the rest of the Pinecrest villas by a thick barrier of ponderosa pines. Through the rear panes, I could see the reservoir 2.5 acres of still water mirroring the fresh October powder on the distant summits. I moved out onto the back porch, my work boots thudding on the weathered timber. That's when I spotted it. A rusted metal stake near the water's edge, partially concealed by fallen needles and scrub. I trudged down to get a closer look, my exhale forming clouds in the frigid air. The post was weathered but firm, imprinted with lettering I had to brush clean to decipher. USGS 1972. Beneath that, a symbol of an anchor I didn't know. I snapped a picture with myself, focusing on the engravings. Something about it seemed significant, like discovering a component to a puzzle you never knew existed. "You must be the nephew." The voice came from behind me, so abrupt I hadn't caught the sound of an approach. I spun around to see a woman in her mid-50s at the tree line, her arms folded. She had on a puffy vest over a turtleneck, her hair yanked back so severely it seemed uncomfortable. Her grin never touched her eyes. "I'm Claudia Brennan, HOA president. Welcome to the area." I walked up the incline toward her, keeping my demeanor neutral. "Garrett Hollies appreciate it, still unpacking." She looked past me toward the water, and something in her expression altered. Assessment perhaps, or a sense of entitlement. "I'm certain Roland briefed you on the neighborhood regulations. We maintain very particular guidelines concerning shared amenities." She gestured vaguely. "The reservoir is common area maintained and managed by the HOA since the community's inception. It's a major feature here, and Roland always honored the access rules. I'm sure you'll follow suit." A faint alarm bell sounded in the back of my head. "Common area?" She inclined her head with feigned patience. "Deed, the limits are quite defined. I can forward you a copy of the HOA covenant if you require elaboration." Her tone suggested I would be foolish to need it. "We expect that homeowners obtain board consent before altering any communal spaces, which includes the reservoir and its banks." I didn't reply immediately. Something in her delivery, the presumption in her voice, made my teeth clench. "I'll need to examine the ownership paperwork first, ensure I comprehend what's legally mine." Her smile tightened into a seam, but she stayed silent. He turned and departed, her shoes crackling on the dry pine straw, leaving me with a coiled tension in my gut. That evening I sat at Uncle Roland's ancient dining table and unsealed the expanding file the lawyer had provided. Inside were generations of papers, some brittle with time, others fresh and new. I located the deed survey near the bottom, meticulously folded inside a plastic sheath. When I smoothed it out, my lungs seized. The property boundaries were illustrated in faint crimson ink, dated July 1967, and they encircled the entire reservoir, every last inch.
There was no uncertainty, no shared line. It was all under my name. Slipped under the map was a penned letter on ruled paper, the script slightly blurred. Uncle Roland's handwriting was unmistakable. "Garrett," it started. "If you're reading this, the cabin is yours and so is the conflict. Don't allow them to seize it. I dedicated 40 years to safeguarding this place from folks who believe regulations are flexible and ownership is debatable. The deed survey is your primary defense. Protect it. There's additional material in the security box at First Peak Bank, box 317.
The key is secured beneath the lowest desk drawer. They'll come for the reservoir. They invariably do. Maintain your position. Love, Roland." I read it twice, then a third time. The gravity of it sank into my core like a rock. I photographed every sheet of the deed survey with my phone, then discovered more files underneath. Correspondence from the Army Corps of Engineers dated 1983. A survey analysis. An official ruling stating the reservoir was not a navigable waterway under federal purview, but private land, exempt due to prior territorial claims predating Colorado's statehood. I didn't grasp all the legal terminology, but the outcome was evident. The reservoir wasn't public. It never had been. My phone vibrated. A text from a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was local. I opened it. "Pinecrest Villas Community Group. Claudia Brennan added you." A follow-up message appeared instantly. "Hello neighbors, please avoid using the reservoir this week while our newest homeowner acquaints himself with community procedures. Let's offer Garrett space to get settled. Thank you for your understanding." I gaped at the display, reading it again. "Our newest homeowner, community procedures, the reservoir this week." As if it were hers to regulate, as if I required her authorization to be on my own land. 3 days later, Claudia returned. This time she brought backup. I was in the kitchen brewing coffee when I detected voices outside, multiple footsteps on the gravel. Through the pane, I saw her marching up the drive with two others, a man in his 60s with a polo tucked into khakis, and a younger woman gripping a leather binder like a lifeline. Neither looked at one another. They just trailed Claudia, their expressions deliberately vacant. I opened the door before they could rap. Claudia's smile was already fixed in place, brilliant and wholly counterfeit. "Garrett, good morning. This is Tom Riker and Angela Moss, members of our board. We felt it would be beneficial to review some documents with you." I moved aside and let them enter, more from intrigue than politeness. They positioned themselves around the dining table as if for a summit. Claudia pushed a stapled set of papers across the wood toward me. "This is the affirmation of community standards. Every resident endorses it upon moving in." I lifted the document and started reading. Most of it was boilerplate HOA jargon. Lawn care, exterior paint approval, noise rules. Then I got to page 3. All communal facilities, including but not restricted to Lake Serene, are designated as common use zones. Homeowners may not block, hinder, or refuse entry to these areas under any conditions. Infractions may lead to penalties up to $5,000 per occurrence. I set the paper down and looked at Claudia. "I'll need to have my attorney examine this before I sign anything." The smile finally fractured. "Just a hairline, but I saw it." "Your attorney," she said as if the words were sour. "Garrett, this is a very simple procedure. Everyone signs. It's how we preserve harmony here." Tom and Angela fidgeted in their seats, neither willing to look at me. I pondered how many times they'd performed this scene. "I'm not signing anything until I comprehend precisely what I'm consenting to," I stated. Claudia's demeanor turned icy. The facade of amiability vanished. "You don't want to complicate this. We retain very seasoned legal representation, and the last thing you need is to estrange your neighbors before you've finished unpacking." There it was, the menace thingy disguised. I stood, signaling the meeting's end. "I appreciate you coming by. I'll be in contact after I've spoken with my lawyer." They left without another word. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat with my laptop and began searching. HOA easement versus deed ownership, Colorado. The results were dense, but one thing was clear. If my deed was filed with the county and was older than the HOA's formation, my ownership rights overrode any rules they attempted to enforce. I verified the stamp on my deed survey. Boulder County Recorder, July 12, 1967, 12 years before the HOA was incorporated. I kept excavating. Concealed in Uncle Roland's archives, I found a scanned PDF I'd overlooked. A grievance filed with the county in 1985. The HOA had attempted this before. They had tried to assert the reservoir as a common area. Uncle Roland had resisted and prevailed. The county had decided in his favor, referencing the original deed and federal survey markers. His final remark read, "I have protected this land because the statute supports me. If the HOA can confiscate my reservoir, they can confiscate anyone's property. The law is designed to prevent precisely this sort of infringement." The next morning, I contacted a real estate lawyer. Her name was Simone Kellerman, and she focused on property conflicts. I outlined the situation as clearly as possible. The deed, the HOA's assertions, Claudia's pressure strategies. Simone listened without interjecting. "Do you possess the original deed survey?" she asked. I confirmed I did. "Excellent. Digitize it and send it to me, but you'll require a contemporary survey to verify those boundaries. Are you aware of any survey markers on the land?" I recalled the metal stake by the bank. "There's a USGS marker from 1972. Simone's tone shifted, suddenly more attentive. "If that's a federal survey monument, it's safeguarded under federal statute. Interfering with it is a felony. And if it designates your property line, the HOA cannot touch it. I'd advise hiring a licensed surveyor immediately. If they're pressing this firmly, they're either uninformed or frantic." I thanked her and disconnected, then promptly scheduled a surveyor for the following week. For the first time since Claudia had appeared, I felt I had a strategy. That afternoon, my phone rang. The screen showed Boulder County Sheriff. My stomach lurched. "This is Garrett Hollies." The voice on the line was composed, professional. "Mr. Hollies, this is Deputy Ramos. We received a report about a potential trespassing incident at your address. The caller alleged you were obstructing community access to a shared reservoir." I gazed out the window at my own backyard. "I'm at my residence on my property." A pause. "Can you supply verification of ownership?" I told him I'd meet him outside. My hands trembled, not from fear but from fury. She'd actually called the police on me for being on my own land. When Deputy Ramos showed up, I had the deed survey ready. He examined it, looked at me, then back at his notes. "Caller stated you were trespassing on HOA property." I kept my voice even. The caller was mistaken. "This deed demonstrates I own the reservoir. It's been on file with the county since 1967. He nodded slowly, took a picture of the deed with his cell and returned it. "I'll incorporate this into my report. For what it's worth, if you retain documentation like this, the individual who made the call may be operating under misapprehension." That evening, I received an email. The subject line read, "Final Notice, HOA Violation." The message was from Gerald Fisk, identified as HOA Legal Counsel. It demanded I desist from blocking community entry to Lake Serene within a fortnight. Failure to adhere would lead to litigation and fines up to $5,000. At the bottom in bold, "This is your sole caution." I read it twice, then hit reply. My answer was 3 sentences. I own the reservoir. It is not HOA property. I will see you in court if required. I clicked send and shut my laptop. The battle Uncle Roland had cautioned me about had formally commenced. The surveyor showed up on a Tuesday morning driving a white truck with GPS apparatus loaded in the bed. His name was Preston Wade, and he had the tranquil, systematic air of a man who had spent years settling boundary disagreements. He shook my hand, looked past me at the reservoir, and gave a single nod. Fine piece of land. Let's determine what we're dealing with. I led him down to the shoreline where I'd found the first marker. Preston knelt beside the metal post, brushing away detritus with gloved hands. He produced a handheld unit and took readings, then looked up at me with something akin to respect. This is a federal monument marker, USGS likely placed during the initial land survey for this area. You understand what this signifies? I shook my head. Preston stood, wiping his hands on his trousers. It means this marker is protected under federal law. Title 18 U.S. Code, Section 1858. Anyone who intentionally ruins, mars, or displaces one of these can confront penalties up to $250,000. It also signifies this boundary was set by a federal agency which takes priority over local squabbles. He paused, letting that sink in. If your deed references this marker, your position just became significantly more robust. We spent the next 3 hours tracing the property line. Preston used GPS gear precise to within centimeters, cross-referencing his data with the coordinates from the original survey. Every 20 minutes, he'd halt to take measurements and jot notes on a tablet. Midway around the reservoir, he discovered another marker hidden under years of pine straw and dirt. Then a third. By the time we concluded, he'd pinpointed 4 markers in total, all federal monuments, all marking the precise boundary indicated on my deed survey. Preston transferred his data to the tablet and pulled up a digital overlay. The crimson line from my 1967 deed survey aligned with his GPS survey nearly perfectly. Mr. Hollis, he said, turning the screen toward me. You own this entire reservoir, not a portion of it, all of it. There's no ambiguity here. No shared boundary. The HOA doesn't have a claim to a single square inch. I felt something unclench in my chest, a tension I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. Thank you, I said. Preston nodded and began packing his gear. One more thing, he added. If anyone from the HOA attempts to contest this, instruct them to call me directly. I've been doing this for 3 decades. I know what stands up in court, and this does. He was loading the final piece of equipment into the truck when a vehicle pulled up behind us, Claudia's silver sedan. She emerged, her face taut with restrained rage, and strode toward us with her phone already in her grasp. What is the meaning of this? She demanded, looking from me to Preston. You can't simply bring unauthorized personnel onto communal land without board approval. I remained calm, my voice level. This is my property. I hired a licensed surveyor to verify the boundaries. Claudia's eyes darted to the equipment, the markers Preston had tagged with vibrant orange tape. You're defacing communal property, she snapped, raising her phone. Preston stayed composed. Ma'am, I'm Preston Wade, licensed surveyor. I've just finished a boundary survey employing federal GPS standards. Every marker I've flagged is a federal monument. If you interfere with them or try to remove them, you'll be committing a federal crime. I'd recommend against placing that call. Claudia's finger hovered over the screen. You can't just appear here without authorization, she stated tightly, her tone manipulative, not dramatic. Preston didn't flinch. No, ma'am, Mr. Hollis owns this land pursuant to the deed filed with Boulder County in 1967. I have GPS data confirming the boundaries. If you'd like a copy of my findings, I'm pleased to supply one through official conduits. She stared at him, then at me, her face flushing crimson. I'm reporting this to the county commissioner. She turned and re-entered her car, slamming the door with enough force to make the frame shudder. Preston watched her depart, then looked at me. That woman is going to be an issue. I nodded. I know. He handed me a business card. Contact me if she escalates and record everything. Photos, videos, witnesses. You're going to require it. After Preston left, I sat in my truck for a long while gazing at the reservoir. Then I drove to the Boulder County Recorder's office. It was a low brick building downtown filled with filing cabinets and the scent of old documents. I informed the clerk I wished to examine the deed history for my property back to 1960. She typed into a computer, then guided me to a rear chamber with microfilm readers and crates of archived files. It took 2 hours of searching, but I found it. A deed application from 1998. The Pinecrest Villas HOA had submitted a request to register an easement on my property, specifically the reservoir and surrounding bank. The application asserted the reservoir was a shared facility accessible to all residents, but stamped across the top in red ink was a single word, rejected. The reason, typed on a separate form, was clear. Applicant failed to furnish consent from legal property owner. Easement application denied. I photographed every page. The HOA had tried to seize this land before and they'd failed. Now they were trying again, 26 years later, hoping I was unaware of the history. I continued sifting through the files and discovered more. Letters exchanged between Uncle Roland and the county. Grievances filed by the HOA. Replies from the county attorney reiterating that the reservoir was private property and the HOA had no legal basis to claim otherwise. I packed everything into my truck and called Simon on the journey home. I discovered something, I said, and detailed what I'd found at the recorder's office. She was quiet for a moment after I finished. Garrett, this is more significant than I presumed. They've been attempting to claim your property for decades and failing. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is deliberate. They know they don't own it, but they're behaving as if they do regardless. That's called slander of title. What does that imply? I asked. Simone's tone became sharper. It means they're making fraudulent claims about your ownership to harm your property rights. If they're doing it knowingly, you can litigate against them for it. But more critically, if they persist and you can establish malicious intent, they could confront serious legal repercussions. She paused. You're going to need more than paperwork, however. You need someone on the interior, someone who understands what Claudia has been doing behind closed doors. I thought about Tom and Angela, how they diverted their gazes during that meeting. I'll work on it, I said. Simone's voice softened slightly. Be cautious. If they're prepared to lie to the county, they're prepared to lie about you. Document everything. Record every exchange if Colorado statute permits it, which it does with single-party consent. Don't provide them with anything they can distort. That night, I went through my phone and backed up every text, every email, every voicemail Claudia had sent. I uploaded Preston's preliminary survey notes to a cloud drive. I digitized Uncle Roland's letters, the deed survey, and the rejected easement application. I constructed a timeline in a spreadsheet, tracking every engagement with the HOA from the day I'd arrived. By the time I finished, it was past midnight, and I had over 300 pages of documentation. I leaned back and observed the screen. For the first time, watching the dusk light ripple across the reservoir, I finally comprehended why he'd struggled for so long. Not for the land itself, but for the principle that truth must endure when everything else yields. I wasn't going to let that occur. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. This is Angela Moss. We need to converse, not at my home. Can you meet me tomorrow at the cafe on Main, 10 a.m., come unaccompanied? I stared at the message for a long moment, then replied, I'll be there. The coffee shop was half vacant when I arrived. Angela Moss sat in a corner booth, hands encircling a mug she hadn't sipped. She glanced up when I entered, and I could see the weariness in her face, dark semicircles under her eyes, a tightness around her mouth that spoke of restless nights. I sat across from her and waited. Thank you for coming, she said quietly. Her eyes flicked to the door, then back to me. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. I don't have much time. If Claudia learns I'm speaking with you, I'll lose my seat on the board. Possibly worse. I leaned forward, keeping my voice low. What did you wish to tell me? Angela inhaled, then reached into her purse and produced a USB drive. She slid it across the table. Everything is on here. Emails, audio recordings from closed board sessions, documents Claudia instructed us to eliminate. Her fingernails were chewed to the quick. I've been on that board for 6 years. I believed we were assisting the community, but Claudia doesn't care about the community. She cares about authority. I pocketed the drive. What's on here? Angela looked at the door again. Proof that she's been lying about the reservoir for years, that she knows it's your property, but she's been informing everyone it belongs to the HOA. She even had me fabricate meeting minutes back in 2015 to make it appear the board voted to classify the reservoir as a common area. We never voted. She just told me to add it to the record. My chest constricted. You falsified official documents. Angela's eyes welled with tears. I know what I did. She threatened to have me ousted from the board if I didn't comply, said she'd tell everyone I'd been embezzling from the HOA fund. It wasn't true, but individuals would have trusted her. She wields that sort of influence here. She wiped her eyes with her knuckle. I retained copies of everything, the original minutes before I altered them, the emails where she dictated exactly what to write. I couldn't endure it any longer. I met her gaze. Why now? She straightened slightly, and I saw something like hope there. Because you're the first individual who's resisted. Everyone else just capitulated, paid the fines, relocated, but you're not retreating, and perhaps that means this can finally cease. She pulled out a folded slip of paper. There's one more thing. Vivian Ashford. She was our secretary for 2 decades before she retired. Claudia pressured her out because Vivian declined to participate in the falsified records. Vivian possesses even more documentation than I do. If you can persuade her to talk, you'll have all you require. I took the paper with Vivian's address. What transpired to her? Angela's voice turned bitter. Claudia threatened her HOA retirement benefits, told her she had connections at the state HOA regulatory board who could ensure Vivian never received a cent. I don't know if she truly possessed that power, but Vivian was frightened. Angela stood, gathering her bag. I must go. Please don't contact me again unless it's through an attorney. And whatever you do with that intelligence, make it meaningful, because if this fails, we're all doomed. She left before I could thank her. I sat for another 10 minutes, then drove directly to Simmons' office. She cleared her schedule and inserted the drive into her computer. As files loaded, she verified the metadata first. Timestamps appear legitimate. Original creation dates align with Angela's timeline. These weren't generated recently. She opened the first folder. This is admissible. We spent the next 2 hours reviewing files. The original meeting minutes from 2015 showing no vote on the reservoir. The modified version Angela had been coerced into creating. Email chains where Claudia gave explicit directives on how to phrase the alterations. Bank statements revealing withdrawals from the HOA General Fund, all marked as legal expenses but linked to cases unrelated to community business. Nearly 50,000 over 3 years. Simran leaned back in her chair, her expression grave. This is fraud, criminal fraud, forgery of official records, embezzlement. If we bring this to the district attorney, Claudia is facing felony charges. She clicked through more files. And there's audio. Do you want to hear it? I nodded. Simran opened the file and pressed play. Claudia's voice came through the speaker, sharp and assured. The old man is deceased. His nephew won't be any wiser. We can finally claim that reservoir the way we should have years ago. I want it handled discreetly. No public votes. Just revise the bylaws and proceed. By the time anyone realizes, it will be too late to contest. Simone stopped the recording. That's intent. She knew it wasn't legal and she proceeded regardless. This isn't an error. This is a conspiracy. She looked at me. You need to file a complaint with the DA's office today, and you need to speak with Vivian Ashford. If she's willing to testify, this case becomes unassailable. I left Simmons' office and drove to the address Angela had provided. Vivian's house was compact and neat with blossom boxes in the windows. I knocked and a woman in her 70s answered. She had gentle eyes but a weary look. Can I assist you? I introduced myself and clarified why I was there. Vivian's face paled. Angela sent you. It wasn't a question. I nodded. She said you might be able to help, that you have information about what Claudia has been doing. Vivian hesitated, then opened the door wider. Enter. We sat in her living room, encircled by photos of grandchildren and decades of memories. Vivian folded her hands in her lap. I worked for that HOA for 20 years. I had faith in it, believed we were improving the community. But Claudia transformed it into her personal fiefdom. She desired that reservoir so desperately. She was prepared to ruin anyone in her path. She stood and walked to a bookshelf, retrieving a manila envelope. I preserved everything. Every draft of every document she instructed me to alter, every email where she commanded me to falsify official records. When I refused to fabricate the 2015 minutes, she told me she'd ensure my HOA retirement benefits were canceled. Said she had contacts at the state regulatory board who could freeze my disbursements. Vivian handed me the envelope. I don't know if she truly had that authority, but I was too terrified to discover, so I retired. But I kept the evidence just in case. I opened the envelope. Inside were printed emails, handwritten notes, and a flash drive labeled Backup Board Meetings 20,102,2022. Vivian sat back down. If you're going to confront her, you need to understand what you're facing. Claudia doesn't accept defeat with dignity. She'll assault you with all she has. She'll deceive. She'll manipulate. She'll turn the entire community against you if she can. She looked at me steadily. But if you have the statute on your side and you have proof, she cannot win, not this time. I thanked her and departed with the envelope. That night, I secured everything across 3 encrypted cloud backups and called Seema. She scheduled a meeting with the district attorney's office for the following week. I wasn't taking any risks. 2 days later, I received an email from Claudia. The subject line read, Community Concern. The message was brief. Garrett, it has been brought to my attention that you've been circulating false allegations about HOA leadership. This is defamation and we will pursue legal recourse if it continues. Additionally, a special board meeting has been arranged for next month to address your breaches of community standards. Attendance is compulsory. I forwarded it to Simon without responding. She called me 5 minutes later. She's panicking, she knows something is imminent, and she's trying to intimidate you into withdrawing. Don't engage, let her continue excavating her own pit. I agreed and hung up. Then I opened my laptop and began preparing for that board meeting because Claudia had just handed me precisely what I needed, a public platform with witnesses. Smel's office smelled of coffee and aged legal volumes. She'd cleared her conference table, and now it was covered with documents organized in neat stacks, timeline, evidence, witness testimonies. She'd invited someone else, a man in his 40s with penetrating eyes and a laptop covered in case decals. This is Luther Kine, Simone said, private investigator. He specializes in financial fraud. Luther shook my hand and got straight to the point. I've been examining Claudia Brennan's finances for the past week. Your lawyer granted me access to the HOA records Angela supplied. He opened his laptop and turned it so I could see the screen. Claudia has been diverting money from the HOA general fund for 3 years. 47,000 total, all marked as legal expenses. But those legal expenses weren't for HOA business. They were for personal property disputes she was pursuing independently. He clicked through a sequence of spreadsheets. She hired a liar to contest a neighbor's fence line, lost the case, paid the legal fees with HOA money, did it again with a drainage disagreement, then tree removal. Luther leaned back. That's embezzlement, a Class 3 felony in Colorado. She's also breached the Colorado Common Interest Ownership Act, which mandates transparent financial reporting. She buried these costs in ambiguous line items. No one knew where the funds were going. Simon pulled out a thick binder and set it before me. This is your timeline, every interaction with Claudia from the day you arrived, every threatening email, every fraudulent police report, every document she falsified. She opened it. July 12, 1967, your deed is filed. September 3, 1998, HOA attempts to register an easement, gets rejected. March 11, 2015, Claudia commands Angela to fabricate meeting minutes. October 9, 2024, you inherit the property. She continued turning pages, each one marked with dates and citations. This isn't merely harassment. This is a pattern spanning decades. If you enter that board meeting with this, you're not defending yourself, you're prosecuting her. Simone closed the binder and produced a notarization stamp. Luther and I have already cataloged the complete record for the DA's office. Each exhibit is numbered, notarized, and printed as read-only. Chain of custody is impeccable. Luther leaned forward. You let her speak first. Let her level her accusations. Don't interrupt. Then you present the evidence, not all of it. Just sufficient to make it clear you're not bluffing. The deed survey, the survey report, 1 or 2 pivotal documents. Reserve the remainder for when she attempts to counter. Simone nodded. And you remain composed. She'll try to provoke you, make you appear unhinged in front of the community. You respond with facts, with statute, with documentation. Make this about the truth, not sentiments. I spent the next week preparing. I contacted the families Angela had referenced, 8 households in total. Each had a narrative. The Merricks had been fined $8,000 for painting their house the incorrect hue, even though the color had been pre-approved. The Larsons had been threatened with a lawsuit for parking in their own garage. And the Whitmore family had been reported to the sheriff 3 times for noise violations during weekday afternoons when their children played outside. Each time deputies found no infraction. I invited all of them to my house on a Saturday afternoon. They came hesitantly, uncertain why I'd reached out. We sat in the living room and I relayed what I'd uncovered. The falsified records, the embezzlement, the decades of attempted hand grabs. When I finished, the room was silent. Then Mr. Merrick spoke. She's been doing this to all of us. His voice was quiet, but there was anger beneath. We thought we were the only ones that we committed some offense, but it was never about regulations, it was about control. I looked at each of them. Attend the board meeting next week. Bring your documentation, your fines, your complaints. When Claudia tries to depict me as a disruptor, I need you to stand and share your stories. Demonstrate to the community this isn't about me, it's about a pattern of abuse that's been ongoing for years. The Whitmores exchanged a look. She retaliate, the husband said. I nodded. Probably, but if we do this collectively with documentation and witnesses, she can't retaliate against everyone. And once the district attorney gets involved, she'll have more significant concerns. They consented. One by one, they pledged to appear. By the time they left, I had 8 families prepared to testify. It was no longer solely my fight, it was all of ours. The night before the meeting, I couldn't sleep. I kept rehearsing the presentation in my mind, the sequence of documents, the crucial points, the replies to Claudia's inevitable assaults. I reflected on Uncle Roland, on the 40 years he dedicated to defending this property, on the letter he'd left me. Don't allow them to seize it. Maintain your position. I retrieved the deed survey one final time and stared at the crimson boundary lines. This wasn't merely about a reservoir. It was about whether individuals like Claudia could rewrite reality through pure force of will. I considered yielding, selling the property and moving somewhere simpler. But then I thought about the Merricks, the Larsons, the Whitmores, about Vivian forced into retirement for refusing to lie, about Angela so frightened she could barely hold a coffee mug. I produced 3 copies of my presentation materials, one for the DA's office, one for the meeting, one secured in a security deposit box. I wasn't being paranoid, I was being prudent. My phone buzzed at 11 p.m., a text from an unknown number. This is Tom Riker, board member. I am aware of what Claudia has been doing. I've been too frightened to speak up, but if you possess evidence tomorrow, I'll vote to remove her. You are not alone. Tom, who had been quietly resentful for years, observing Claudia bulldoze every opposing voice, too afraid of her sway until now. I stared at the message for a long moment, then replied, "Thank you, see you tomorrow." I set my phone down and looked at the binder Simon had prepared, the complete archive. Generations of lies, generations of theft, generations of people too scared to resist. But tomorrow that would change. Tomorrow Claudia would have to answer for her actions before the entire community with nowhere to conceal herself. I didn't sleep. I just lay in the darkness, listening to the wind in the pines, contemplating what was coming. By morning I was prepared. I donned a suit, something Uncle Roland would have done. I packed the presentation materials into a leather briefcase. I verified the battery on my phone's recording application. Colorado was a single-party consent state. Everything that transpired would be documented. I drove to the community center at 6:30. The meeting commenced at 7. When I pulled into the parking lot, it was already half full. I recognized some of the vehicles: the Merrick's truck, the Larson sedan, the Whitmore's minivan. And in the front row, Claudia's silver car, polished and pristine, parked as if she owned the premises. I grabbed my briefcase and entered. The conference room was arranged like a tribunal. Claudia sat at the head table with Tom and 2 other board members. Rows of folding chairs faced them, filling rapidly. I counted over 100 individuals. I took a seat in the 3rd row, briefcase on my lap, and waited. Claudia saw me and smiled. It was the same grin she'd worn the first day we met, assurance condescending as if she'd already triumphed. I didn't smile back. I just looked at her until she averted her gaze. Then I opened my briefcase and retrieved the first document, the deed survey, 1967. My proof, my weapon. The struggle Uncle Roland had cautioned me about was about to begin. Claudia called the meeting to order at 7:03. Her voice was crisp, authoritative, amplified by a small microphone attached to her collar. The room hushed instantly. Over 180 people were packed into folding chairs, standing along the rear wall, crowding the doorway. I'd never witnessed this many residents at an HOA meeting before. Word had disseminated. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," Claudia began, her smile perfectly calibrated. "We have a great matter to address tonight. A new resident has been interfering with communal property, making fraudulent allegations against HOA leadership and fostering division in our neighborhood." She paused for effect. "We value transparency here at Pinecrest Villas. So we're offering Mr. Hollis a chance to clarify his conduct before we decide on suitable consequences." She gestured toward me like a prosecutor identifying the accused. "Mr. Hollis has declined to endorse our community standards agreement. He's blocked entry to Lake Serene, which has been a shared facility since this development was founded. He's retained attorneys to intimidate board members, and he's been disseminating disinformation about HOA finances." Her voice adopted a tone of disappointed patience. "We've attempted to collaborate with him to help him comprehend how matters function here, but he selected confrontation over cooperation." The crowd murmured, some nodded along, others appeared uncertain. I saw Mr. Merrick in the fourth row, his jaw taut. Mrs. Larson sat near the back, hands clasped. The Whitmores were in the second row with a folder thick with documents. Angela Moss sat alone in the corner, staring at the floor. Tom Riker at the head table kept his eyes lowered. Claudia continued, "Mr. Hollis alleges he owns the reservoir, but that reservoir has been community property for generations. We possess documentation, we have bylaws. We have a duty to safeguard the interests of all 240 families in this development, not just one person who believes the rules are beneath him." She looked directly at me. "Mr. Hollis, would you like to respond to these concerns?" I stood slowly, briefcase in hand. I didn't walk to the front, not yet. I spoke from where I was, my voice calm and clear. "I would, thank you." I opened the briefcase and retrieved the first document. "This is the deed to my property, filed with Boulder County on July 12, 1967, 12 years before this HOA was established." I held it up for people to see. "It illustrates the legal boundaries of my land. Those boundaries encompass the entire reservoir." "Not a segment of it, all of it." Claudia's smile tightened. "That's an antiquated document. Our bylaws override individual property claims when it concerns shared amenities." I nodded as if considering her point. "Actually, they do not. According to Colorado Revised Statutes Title 38, Section 30,102, a deed filed with the county takes precedence over any subsequent organizational regulations or bylaws. The HOA cannot alter property ownership through internal policy." The murmuring intensified. I pulled out the subsequent document. "This is a survey report completed 2 weeks ago by a licensed surveyor, Preston Wade. He employed federal GPS standards to confirm the boundaries shown on my deed." I held up a map with bright survey markers clearly visible. "He located 4 federal monument markers on my property placed by the United States Geological Survey in 1972. Those markers are protected under Title 18 U.S. Code Section 1858. Tampering with them is a federal crime punishable by up to $250,000 in fines." Claudia stood, her voice sharp. "This is precisely the sort of legal intimidation I referenced. You're attempting to bully this community with technicalities." I met her eyes. "These aren't technicalities, they're facts, and I have more." I pulled out another document. "This is a deed application submitted by the Pinecrest Villas HOA in 1998. The HOA tried to register an easement on my property to claim shared use of the reservoir." I turned to face the crowd. "It was rejected by the county. The reason is inscribed right here. Applicant failed to furnish consent from legal property owner. The HOA tried to seize this land 26 years ago, and they failed because they don't own it. They never did." The room erupted, people talking over one another, some shouting questions. Claudia banged a gavel on the table. "Order, we require order." When the noise subsided, I continued. "There's something else you should know. In 2015, the HOA board supposedly voted to designate the reservoir as community property. I have a copy of the meeting minutes that record this vote." I pulled out 2 pages and held them side by side. "Except the vote never occurred. This is the original version of those minutes, no mention of the reservoir, and this is the altered version that was filed as the official record. Someone modified these documents. Someone committed fraud." Claudia's face went ashen. "That's a falsehood. You forged those documents." I shook my head. "No, I acquired them from someone who was present, someone who was commanded to make those alterations." I looked at Angela. She was trembling, but she stood. Her voice was barely audible. "I made the changes. Claudia instructed me to. She said if I didn't, she'd have me removed from the board and destroyed my reputation." The room went silent. Every eye turned to Claudia. She pointed at Angela, her hand shaking. "You're lying. You're conspiring with him to annihilate me." Angela's voice grew stronger. "I have the emails. You told me exactly what to write, exactly how to phrase it. Retained copies of everything because I knew this was wrong." Tom Riker stood at the head table. "I can corroborate that. I was at that meeting in 2015. We never voted on the reservoir." Claudia appended it to the record afterward. Another board member, a woman I didn't recognize, raised her hand. "She did the same thing in 2017, made us vote on items that were never on the agenda, then revised the minutes later to state we'd approved them." Claudia's face turned red. She slammed her hand on the table. "This is preposterous," she said, her voice rising. "You're accepting the word of an outsider over 15 years of my service. I pulled out the final document. This isn't fabricated. It's a bank statement showing $47,000 withdrawn from the HOA general fund over the last 3 years, all marked as legal expenses, but those expenses weren't for HOA business. They were for your personal lawsuits. I held up the statement. You utilized community funds to pay your attorneys to combat your neighbors over fence lines and drainage disputes that had no connection to HOA duties. That's embezzlement. It's a Class 3 felony in Colorado. The crowd exploded again, shouting anger, confusion. Mr. Merrick stood. She penalized me $8,000 for the paint color. Where did those funds go? Mrs. Larson stood. She threatened to sue me over my garage. Was that a shakedown? The Whitmores stood together. She contacted the police on our children 3 times for playing outside. More people began standing, more voices. A wave of fury built in. Claudia tried to shout over them. These are all falsehoods, coordinated assaults. I've served this community for 15 years. Announced to Claudia, someone had already dispatched the full evidence package to the DA's office that morning. They'd coordinated with the sheriff to observe tonight's gathering. The doors at the back opened. 2 men in business suits entered, followed by a uniformed sheriff's deputy. One of the men held up a badge. I'm Detective Morrison with the Boulder County District Attorney's Office. We possess a warrant to confiscate HOA financial records and documents pertaining to property claims filed by this board. He looked at Claudia. Mrs. Brennan, we'd like you to accompany us for questioning. Claudia sank into her chair. Her face crumbled. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked small, powerless. I did this for the community, she whispered. I was endeavoring to protect property values, to uphold standards. The detective didn't respond. He simply gestured toward the door. Claudia stood slowly, unsteady on her feet. As she passed me, she halted. You've demolished everything I constructed. I looked at her without anger, without satisfaction, just weary. No, you did that yourself. She left with the detective. The deputy remained behind to secure the HOA office. The room stayed in chaos for another 20 minutes. Individuals were crying, embracing, arguing. Tom Riker attempted to restore order, but no one was listening. Finally, he just dismissed the meeting. I packed my briefcase and walked outside. The parking lot was filled with people standing in small clusters, processing what they just witnessed. Mr. Merrick found me and shook my hand. Thank you. I believed I was insane. I thought I merited those fines. Mrs. Larson embraced me, tears in her eyes. You restored our dignity to us. I drove home alone. The reservoir was dark and tranquil under a clear sky. I sat on the back porch for a long time, listening to the silence. It was over. The struggle Uncle Roland had cautioned me about, the conflict I'd been preparing for since the day I arrived, was finally over. But I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt drained, relieved, and thankful that the truth had been potent enough to stand on its own. The district attorney's office held a press conference 3 days later. I watched it from my living room, coffee going cold in my grasp. The DA stood at the podium, flanked by Detective Morrison. The room was packed with local journalists, cameras flashing as he commenced speaking. After a comprehensive investigation, our office has filed criminal charges against Claudia Brennan, former president of the Pinecrest Villas Homeowners Association. He adjusted his spectacles and read from a prepared statement. Mrs. Brennan confronts 4 counts: forgery of official documents, a Class 5 felony; theft of HOA funds totaling $47,000, a Class 3 felony; harassment of multiple community members, a Class 1 misdemeanor; and filing false police reports on 2 occasions, each a Class 3 misdemeanor. He looked up from the paper. If convicted on all counts, Mrs. Brennan faces 4 to 12 years incarceration, plus restitution to the HOA and affected residents. She is currently released on $50,000 bail. Porter raised her hand. What instigated this investigation? Detective Morrison stepped forward. We received a formal complaint from a property owner who supplied extensive documentation. Our forensic accountants verified misappropriation of funds, and multiple witnesses corroborated the forgery allegations. I switched off the television. My phone had been ringing incessantly since the board meeting, reporters desiring interviews, neighbors wanting to thank me. I'd ignored most of them. I didn't want to be the story. I just wanted this to be concluded. The emergency HOA meeting occurred that Saturday. Under 15 households appeared. They relocated it to the high school auditorium to accommodate everyone. I sat in the rear trying to remain inconspicuous. It didn't work. Individuals kept approaching me, shaking my hand, thanking me, apologizing for not trusting me sooner. Tom Riker called the meeting to order. He looked exhausted. First, I wish to apologize to this community. I've been on the board for 8 years and I failed you. I knew matters weren't correct, but I was too afraid to speak out. That concludes today. He gestured to the empty chairs beside him. The entire former board has resigned. We're here to elect new leadership and determine how to advance. The meeting lasted 3 hours. Vivian Ashford was nominated as interim president. She accepted with quiet resolve. I served this community for 20 years before Claudia compelled me out. I'd like to finish what I commenced correctly this time. The vote was unanimous. A new treasurer, a retired accountant named David Chen, was elected, along with a new secretary and committee chairs. Chen presented the financial audit. The HOA fund currently contains $112,000. Based on dues collected, it should hold closer to $170,000. We're collaborating with the DA's office to recover missing funds from Mrs. Brennan's assets. He clicked to the next slide. We've identified 15 families who were fined under dubious circumstances. We're recommending full reimbursements plus interest. Vivian stood. What we can do is pledge to transparency. Every financial transaction will be published monthly. Every board meeting will be recorded. Every vote will be documented. No more decisions behind closed doors. The crowd applauded. Someone called out, "What about the reservoir?" All eyes turned to me. Vivian looked at me, her expression gentle. "Mr. Hollis owns the reservoir. That's been established. The question is what occurs now. Garrett, would you like to address that?" I stood slowly, feeling 200 pairs of eyes on me. I hadn't desired this conflict. I just wanted to reside here peacefully, but what had transpired taught me something. I took a breath. My uncle dedicated 40 years to protecting this property, not because he was selfish, but because he understood that if he yielded, it would establish a precedent. That authority without accountability would proliferate. I pulled out a folded piece of paper from my jacket. I've had my attorney draft a community access agreement. It permits residents of Pinecrest Villas to utilize the reservoir for recreation without charge on a reservation basis. The reservoir remains my property legally, but it's accessible to everyone who resides here. I held up the paper. This isn't an HOA rule. It's a voluntary agreement from me to you because this community warrants better. The silence lasted 3 seconds, then someone started clapping, then another, then everyone rose to their feet. Vivian wiped tears from her eyes. Mr. Merrick nodded at me across the room. Mrs. Larson mouthed, "Thank you." I sat down quickly, overwhelmed. The meeting concluded with a unanimous vote to hire an independent management company, professional oversight, routine audits, term limits on all positions. It wasn't flawless, but it was a commencement. Walking to my truck, someone called. "Had you seen the letter?" I halted. "What letter?" she sounded amused. "Inspector email. Claudia's attorney sent it an hour ago." I located it. Subject line, formal apology. "Dear Mr. Hollis, on behalf of my client Claudia Brennan, I wish to extend a sincere apology for the distress caused by her actions. Mrs. Brennan acknowledges that her claims regarding Lake Serene were legally unfounded and that her conduct was inappropriate. She regrets the harm caused and accepts full responsibility." I read it twice. It felt hollow, rehearsed, likely composed to assist with sentencing. I closed the email without replying. Simone's voice returned. "You don't have to answer, but I wanted you to see it. She knows she lost entirely." That night I sat on the deck and gazed at the reservoir. The water was black glass under a half-moon. I reflected on Uncle Roland, on the letter he'd left me, on the decades he'd spent fighting the same struggle. I wondered if he'd ever felt this fatigued, this heavy with the weight of others' gratitude. My phone buzzed, a text from Angela. "This is Angela. I wanted to express my gratitude. I've been carrying the guilt of my actions for 9 years. You provided me an opportunity to rectify it. I'm testifying at the trial, whatever is necessary." I stared at the message, then typed back, "You were more courageous than you believe. Thank you for standing firm." I set the phone down and closed my eyes. The wind moved through the pines, a sound like distant waves. Somewhere in the development, individuals were going to sleep, knowing their HOA wouldn't harass them tomorrow, knowing their fines would be refunded. Knowing someone had finally said no, I didn't feel like a champion. I felt like someone who'd done what was necessary because no one else would. Perhaps that was sufficient. Perhaps that was all Uncle Roland had ever wanted, not victory, just refusal, the simple act of maintaining one's position when everyone else had been displaced. The fight was over, but the labor of rebuilding trust, of healing a fractured community, was just beginning. And for the first time since I had inherited this property, I felt I wanted to be part of that. Not as a symbol, just as a neighbor. Someone who believed the statute mattered. Someone who thought individuals warranted better. 4 months later, I stood in a courtroom for the final time, the sentencing hearing. Claudia sat at the defense table in a gray suit, her hands folded, her face pale and drawn. She looked smaller than I recalled, diminished. The jury had deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. The judge, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair, reviewed the verdict. "Mrs. Brennan, you have been found guilty of forgery, theft, harassment, and filing false police reports. These offenses represent systematic abuse of authority over a period of years." She paused. "However, the court notes your lack of prior criminal history and expression of remorse." The judge looked down at her notes. "For theft, a Class 3 felony, I sentence you to 18 months incarceration, followed by 2 years of supervised probation. For forgery, an additional suspended sentence contingent on full restitution. For the misdemeanors, 100 hours of community service and a fine of $2,500. Additionally, you are permanently prohibited from serving on any homeowner association board in Colorado for 10 years. You will pay full restitution of $47,000 to the Pinecrest Villas HOA plus $12,000 in legal fees and interest." The gavel descended. "Court is adjourned." I watched as Claudia was led away. She glanced back once, her eyes finding mine. I saw no anger there, just exhaustion. I looked away. Simone touched my elbow. "It's finished." I nodded. Justice had been served, not vengeance, justice. 2 weeks later, the Pinecrest Villas HOA held its first community gathering at the reservoir. Vivian had organized a picnic, an opportunity to start anew. I'd agreed to host it on my property, the first official use of the access agreement I'd drafted. The weather was ideal. Early June, the reservoir mirroring a cloudless blue sky. Families arrived with coolers and blankets, children dashing toward the water. Mr. Merrick brought a grill. Mrs. Larson brought potato salad. The Whitmore children were the first in the water, laughing and splashing. Vivian found me standing near the old USGS marker, now cleaned and marked with a small plaque. Federal Survey Monument established 1972, marking the boundary of private property and the principle that legal ownership cannot be erased by time or intimidation. She read it aloud, then smiled. Uncle Roland would have appreciated that. I nodded. He struggled for 40 years to protect this place. Not just the land, the idea behind it. Vivian looked out at the family's gathering. You didn't merely win a property dispute, Garrett. You restored people's dignity. The Merricks can look at their house without shame. The Larsons don't flinch at HOA notices. The Whitmores allow their children to play outside without fear. Later that afternoon, I retrieved an old photo album from Uncle Roland's study. I opened it to a picture from 1970. Uncle Roland standing beside the USGS marker, younger, his hand resting on the metal post. He was grinning. Behind him, the reservoir stretched out pristine. I showed it to Vivian. She touched the photo gently. I turned it over. In Uncle Roland's handwriting, this place is an inheritance not just of land, but of principle. Property rights matter because they protect everyone, not just the powerful. Stand firm, stand true. Vivian wiped her eyes. He was a good man. I closed the album. He taught me that sometimes the right thing is also the difficult thing, that some battles must be fought because not fighting permits injustice to become normal. As the sun began to set, families packed up. Mr. Merrick shook my hand. This reservoir used to symbolize everything flawed with this place. Now it symbolizes everything we rectified. Mrs. Larson embraced me. Thank you for not surrendering. After everyone left, I sat alone on the dock, feet dangling over the water. The reservoir was calm, reflecting orange and pink clouds. I contemplated the journey from that first day to this moment. Months of research, legal contests, confrontations, but also courage. Individuals like Angela and Vivian selecting truth over comfort. A community deciding they warranted better. I pulled out the deed survey one final time. The crimson boundary lines were faded but official. The stamp from 1967. I traced the outline of the reservoir with my finger, thinking about all the people who'd tried to erase these lines, to claim ownership through persistence and intimidation. But the statute had held, documents had mattered, truth had triumphed, not because it was simple, but because someone had been willing to stand and state, this is mine, this is real, this matters. Uncle Roland had done it for 40 years. Now I would do it for however long it required. I stood and walked back toward the house. Behind me, the reservoir held the final light of day. The USGS marker stood silent, unaltered, unmoved, a reminder that some boundaries exist not to divide but to define, not to exclude but to protect, and that when those boundaries are challenged, the only response is to stand firm and let the statute speak. We're QA Stories, and this is merely one of many incredible narratives. Discover more by viewing the next video. We assure you it's even more astonishing.